Hi, I'm Alex Radgost from Board Game Co. And today I'm reviewing Force of Radgost, a game that was on Kickstarter and you can late pledge for roughly another 2 weeks or so. I'll throw a link down below. And long story short, I got this one on the last day of the Kickstarter. There were shipping delays, there were issues, so I got it the last day of the Kickstarter, which was not enough time to play and cover it in time for the Kickstarter. So I figured I'd get a review or coverage in before the Pledge Manager closes, so you have an opportunity to, well, late pledge this one if you haven't backed it already. Now, before we get into the review, the coverage and all that, first of all, obviously a prototype. The Kickstarter has gorgeous miniatures, of which we have like 2 for kind of just reference, but like primarily I'm working with standees and everything else. I'm working with printed cards. So almost everything you're seeing, from half the art on the everything is missing, the standees, the coins, everything here is very much prototype phase, and obviously rules as well are subject to change. Now with that, let's go ahead and give the 1-minute overview to Force of Radgost, because honestly, this is a fairly easy game to explain, all things considered. So, Force of Radgost is a game in which you have children that are lost in the woods. You're going to be trying to encounter or trying to get those children back to the village before 3 days are up. Every single day, you're going to go ahead and take multiple actions. The actions are going to be basically wandering around the board, having encounters with either the forest, in which you will basically gear up and get ready for the next encounter, or having encounters with creatures, in which you'll either have a successful or a failed encounter, which will drive the time track forward. So you're going to have encounters back and forth until you eventually run into the children. Once you run into the children, you're going to head back to the village, and hopefully you do that before 3 days are over, because then you will win the game. And if it takes longer than 3 days, well, that's how you'll lose the game. The other way to lose the game is going to be if all the characters playing the game eventually get tied up or captured by creatures and no one else can save them, then that also can trigger you losing the game. That is effectively Force of Radgost. Now, there's a few other things to note. The general turn structure of those 3 days is a day consists of having 7 successful encounters, where you're going to move the creatures off the board onto your encounter track, and then from there you'll move into Nightfall, where you can have 3 more successful encounters, and then from there to Night, where at that point the creatures are going to wander the board, the forest on their own, having encounters with each other, or potentially running into you and finding you, and then rinse and repeat for 3 more times, and that is going to be 3 days in Force of Radgost. The individual turn structure is primarily going to come down to finding your character's stats, their movement stat. Your character's going to have their own little pocket, the divider. You're going to find their stat, how they move. You're going to go ahead and grab the dice, and then you're going to roll the directional die and the movement die to decide how far you're moving and in what direction you're moving. Because in the game, you know exactly where the children are. It's not very hard to find them when you know the children are over here. So the way the game simulates that is effectively by having you lost or wandering through the forest, which means you don't always get to decide where to go. So you're going to roll a 7, and you're going to roll right, so your character, wherever your character may be, if my character's over here, they're going to move to the right and end up going 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by moving to the right. So then in general, they're going to move to the right throughout their movement, and then occasionally, your alternatives are going to be rolling left, right, or free. Free is going to be where you have agency in this game, because if you're rolling randomly the entire time, you'll never actually make your way to the children except by sheer blind luck. That said, the way you do get to the children is through the occasional free movement, where you can effectively slowly meander your way closer to where the children are, or alternatively through the use of various items or encounters that will give you more agency over how you move. So that complete loss aspect, well, that will slowly go away as you have encounters. You'll run into a giant who will lift you heads over the trees so you can see where the children are and slowly make your way there. You'll encounter various objects or items that will allow you to bypass the rules of rolling the movement dice, slowly allowing you to make your way to the children. Along the way, you're going to have encounters with creatures. Whenever you end your turn, you will either have an encounter in the forest, and again, level up and prepare for, not level up, but gather some of these cards, which will give you usually beneficial things that will help you in your journey, or alternatively, having encounters with the creatures, in which case you are going to go ahead and you're going to reference, you're going to sit there, you're going to open your little book, look at your character stats, and choose whether you want to run, hide, fight, or communicate with the creature. Now you choose that before seeing the creature. So you might be by the creature and ready to decide what do you think is the right move for you. And then you sit there and say, well, if I'm good at communication, I have communication 10, so I'm going to go ahead and communicate with that creature. From there, you're going to go ahead and flip the creature, flip it. That's going to be a, what is that? Is that an 8? That's a 4. We have a 4 creature over there. Again, prototype over here, everything else. We're going to go ahead and look through the book of encounters to find the 4. The 4 is going to be the Omaja. Omaja on page... we have the Omaja on page 19. So let's go ahead to page 19, where a few things will happen. First of all, there's going to be an entire page of lore. Basically, just a ton of stuff you can read about the creature. Some things might actually help you or be relevant to various cards in the game, but it's primarily lore, interesting to read through. And then we go here, and we said we're doing communication on a 10. Communication 10, perfect, I succeeded. Communication with Omaja, in fact, does not exist. The success is in being quiet. You keep quiet and look high at oak tree tops. you're not letting anything get your attention. Whatever that might be, it'll transform into Omaja and overpower you. At some time, it goes away and you continue your movement when it is your turn. First, lock the action for communication, which means I can't communicate in the next encounter. Second, move the Omaja's figure and token on the time tracker. So we're going to go ahead and move the token and the figure over to the time tracker where it takes up one of our 7 encounters for the day, and then we locked our communication. So different encounters will have different results. Anything from, like I said already, being lifted head over the forest to find the children, to encounters that will hurt you, to capture you, to encounters that will let you progress, to encounters that will draw cards from these various decks, cards that will help you or give you distractions along the way. That's basically the game structure of Force of Radgost. Move, have encounters, rinse and repeat until you run into the children, and then make your way back to the village before 3 rounds are up. So, what do I like about this game? So to begin with, this game is based on like real lore. This game is based on real characters, real mythical aspects of their lore, and it's the whole, everything from the art to the miniatures, if you look at the Kickstarter, to the general world building going on here is fantastic. You're going to draw cards that will reference all the creatures in different ways, whether or not you encounter those creatures. You're going to encounter, I would argue, most of the creatures as you go through the game, and then rinse and repeat, because every round you're going to reshuffle them all up and redistribute them so you can repeat your encounters, have them again, encounter new things. Across multiple games, you'll have encountered multiple creatures in different ways, learning which ones have better degrees of preferences for communication, for fighting and all that, all of which will only help you so much because you don't actually see the creature right away when you're making that choice. You'll eventually run into various effects or art, cards, things that will let you see it before you make a choice, so you will get that agency or get that learning of the game as you continue to progress through it. But for the most part, you're kind of just dealing with this choose your own adventure around the folklore of this game. The game, like I said already, everything ties together beautifully. The game is simple to set up, simple to play. This game, it teaches in like 2 minutes. I can teach someone up and running. I can get them up and running in the game in 2 minutes. The game sets up in a handful of minutes. The game is fairly accessible. I would say are maybe 45 to 60 minutes for our gameplay. It can run longer depending on the player count or depending on if things really don't go your way in the game, if you find yourself far more lost than not. But it's quick, it's accessible, and it's a fun little choose your own adventure story as you go through it. In terms of things I don't like about the game, my biggest thing, and this is the way the game is designed, so we'll take it with a grain of salt, my biggest thing is that the game does not feel difficult at all. Now, that is designed that way. This is a father and son team designing the game, and they wanted the game to feel like more of a fun experience as you go through it, as opposed to a game where you will lose or win in equal measure. And so to that end, while you absolutely can lose the game, it's one where you rarely will feel that you will. It's one where eventually you might run out of enough time or happen to have 2 or 3 negative encounters in a row that results in your adventurers being caught or hidden or whatnot. But for the most part, you're going to make your way through the game, you're going to have encounters, and you're eventually going to run into the children, and then you're eventually going to make your way back to the village before time runs out. Because once you find the children, you can make your way back to the village without needing to roll the directional die. Think of it as, the villagers announcing some sort of siren or smoke signals or whatever it is, but you can make your way back to the village once you find your children. It's only until you find the children that you're kind of wandering around with that direction die, forcing you into different choices. So for the most part, the game does not feel difficult. And again, by intent, but it is something that I don't like about the game. In terms of the Kickstarter did give you some extra missions or extra scenarios that supposedly are more difficult. I have not had the chance to play those, so I can't comment on that. I would love for this game to feel like I actually might lose. I prefer to win, to be very clear. I'd argue that I'd rather win this game 70% of the time. But right now, it feels like I'd win this game 95% of the time, which is not as much the experience I'm looking for, because it reduces to a purely narrative journey as opposed to something where I feel like my choices really matter, which brings me to point 2. I don't feel like my choices really matter. For the most part, characters are all going to be, again, there's a whole bunch of characters in the game, a whole bunch of different options you have in terms of picking different characters, having these characters, the characters with all the different stats and all that. And not only do the characters not feel as different as I would like, I'd ideally like them to have some sort of ability, unique ability that makes them different in some way. But for the most part, even though they don't feel different, and additionally their stats, I find it rare that I'm incentivized to do anything but choose whatever is the most obvious stats. So for instance, let's take over here Radabor. Over here, Radabor is pretty good at hiding and communication. Those are his 2 best stats. So I would mostly just want to go ahead and either hide or communicate, at least until I know better. Now that's different once you have a creature on the board that you have a failed encounter with, because the creatures, once you have a failed encounter, will stay on the board, allowing someone else to be able to reference what they prefer. Do they prefer communication? Do they prefer hiding, running, all those things? things and then reacting accordingly. But when you're dealing with a face-down creature, most of the time you usually just want to choose whatever it is you're best at. There's not a ton of agency in those decisions. There's not a ton of ways that these characters themselves feel different. The creatures feel vastly different. Like I said already, they have a giant book of encounters that gives you tons of different ways to engage with them, and they all feel totally different, both in terms of the choices as well as the story lines that they will trigger, as well as the decks of cards that they're going to have you search through to resolve the encounter, all those things. It's mostly the characters themselves that I felt lacked a degree of agency in this game. As far as what I can see others not liking, it's primarily going to come down to the fact that this is a narrative-based game. Now, narrative-based games are something that I didn't like way back in the day, but they've continuously grown on me the more I've played them the past 5-6 years, whatever it's been. So I like the narrative aspect of this game. I like the aspect of running into another creature and going through the book of encounters and trying to see what will play out. I enjoy the story aspect of, the giant wanting to help us and lifting us over the trees, the fairies seeing us and saying, hey, I'm glad you paused and talked to us. They don't say it that way. And then giving us a fairy cape that will help us in the journey. I like going through those things and learning how this world all ties together through the tons of cards and encounters that you will have in this game. So I enjoy that aspect of the gameplay. But combine the fact that the game is mostly you're going to win it for the most part, combined with the fact that it's mechanically light, not mechanically lacking entirely, but it is mechanically light, and if you are someone that does not enjoy narrative-based games, then this likely is not a game for you. As far as final thoughts on Force of Radgost, overall, so first of all, this one, I'm ranking this one a 3 out of 5, meaning 3 is a 5, rating scale down below. It's a good game. It's a solid game. I'm enjoying going through the system. More so than I thought I would, by the way. I've already watched well before doing this, I already watched King of Average's review doing the Kickstarter, and I saw his review, lots of high points, but he talked about how it's most of the things I'm saying. It's mechanically light, and it's terms of just basically going through these encounters. And I thought that I would not enjoy that. And I do enjoy that. I just wish that there was more of a game around it. Which puts me in a place for it that I want to play this, but I want to feel like I could lose it more. It's one that I've enjoyed playing. I've so far played this in terms of player count. I've played this so far solo, and I've played it with my daughter. When you play it solo, you do want to control multiple characters. Keep that in mind. And I would say overall, I have enjoyed the experience, but it's one that unless the game gets more difficult, I don't think I would play this unless I was playing it with Ricky. Because when I'm playing with Ricky, then yeah, sure, story time and seeing how things play out. It's more of a fun, let's do this together kind of thing. If I'm playing it solo or if I'm playing it with other gamers in my game group, then I definitely do want to feel more of a challenge, which is not the way the game is designed, which is fine, but that is what I would be looking for out of this. So overall, that's my review of Force of Radgost. Currently on, I don't know which pledge manager it's on. I'll throw a link down below, but it's used to be on Kickstarter, currently available to late pledge for the next 2 weeks or so. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.